Spider-Man Blue by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale is a really interesting comic for me. It was written a little over 20 years ago, and according to the introduction, readers at the time were forgetting the character of Gwen Stacy. In Spider-Man comics in the early 2000s, Mary Jane and Peter Parker had been married for a number of years, and Gwen Stacy had been dead for a long time. As a result, even though the character served as a major love interest for Spider-Man, Gwen Stacy was not remembered all that fondly by readers who hadn't grown up with her. That generation of Spider-Man fans knew Mary Jane and Peter Parker together, and they didn't know anything before that couple. So seeing as how the creative team behind this comic felt that Gwen Stacy was a really important character to Peter's life, they wanted to do a story focused on Gwen and Peter's relationship. So Spider-Man Blue is meant to tell that story of how Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker initially fell in love. At least, that's how it's billed. But what I find really interesting about this comic is the fact that you don't actually see a lot of Gwen and Peter together. This isn't really a love story. It feels like an incomplete love story to me. You don't really see Peter and Gwen spend a lot of time together, and all in all, it doesn't even feel like Gwen Stacy is in the book that much. But in spite of all of this is still a book that managed to make me feel something. It made me feel remorse and sadness and melancholy, and it actually caused me to feel a little bit of what Peter was feeling after Gwen Stacy's death. So I wanted to take a look at how the book accomplishes this. Essentially, this book is Peter Parker in the present recounting his past with Gwen. The comic starts off with him remembering Gwen's death. Every year on the day of her death, Spider-Man returns to the bridge where she died and leaves a rose for her. He doesn't make a big deal out of it, and no one else knows he does it, but it's something just for him. It's a way to remember Gwen. Speaking into a recorder, he acts like he's talking to Gwen, and from there, we learn of how he first met Gwen Stacy. This book retells a bunch of stories found in the Amazing Spider-Man 40 through 48, and so because of that, we're just kind of thrust into the middle of things. At the very beginning of the comic, after an altercation with the Green Goblin, a building blows up, the Green Goblin gets knocked out, and Peter Parker decides to save the Green Goblin. The Green Goblin, of course, is Norman Osborn, who is the father of Harry Osborn, who is one of Peter's friends. Peter decides to visit Norman in the hospital since he's friends with Harry, and that is when he first sees Gwen Stacy. That's how it started, he says. I turned back and just for a moment I saw you looking right at me. I turned into a puddle. And then immediately after that, Peter Parker buys a motorcycle, and Peter Parker's a nerd, so I don't know, it's just kind of funny. But it works out because he sees Gwen Stacy with her group of friends walking out in front of the motorcycle shop, and he takes her for a ride. And as a reader from that point on, all I really cared about was the relationship between Gwen and Peter. The comic has a lot of fights between various villains like the Green Goblin, the Rhino, Kraven the Hunter. At one point, Spider-Man fights 2 vultures, but the thing is that in my eyes, all of those fights felt so unnecessary and I just didn't care. Essentially, while reading this comic, all I really cared about was the relationship between Peter and his friends and Gwen Stacy. In the second issue, Peter meets Gwen Stacy in science class and they work together for a bit. And later on, when he's at home, Peter's Aunt May, tells him that there's a girl waiting for him, so he's expecting Gwen Stacy, only to find that Mary Jane is there. And this throws a wrench into the works a little bit because Mary Jane is very much into Peter Parker. She's very much a party girl and she's very clingy around Peter, but Peter, of course, is into Gwen Stacy. So there's a part where Peter and his friends and Mary Jane and Gwen are all hanging out at the cafe, and Peter has to leave to go fight the lizard and Mary Jane goes with him. And so after this, Gwen Stacy is left behind. And you get a lot of minor scenes where it feels like Peter Parker wants to be with Gwen Stacy, but he can't because either he's out being Spider-Man and kept away from her because of that, or he is with her, but he is not with her alone. He's with other people and her. So as a result of that, the two of them don't ever get a real moment to connect. So for instance, Peter Parker tells people he's sick, and so Mary Jane, who's in love with him, comes to visit him and feed him soup. And then while she's there, Gwen Stacy comes and she brings the adventures of Huckleberry Finn with her to read to him while he's sick. And so you just have these 2 hot girls doting on nerdy Peter Parker. So anyways, the girls are kind of fighting for his affection, and then Peter Parker's like, oh, I should get some rest. Please leave me alone. And then there are some more superhero battles, blah, blah, blah. And there's a scene where Flash Thompson is having a going away party where everyone is there, including Gwen Stacy. Then Kraven the Hunter attacks because he smells Spider-Man's scent or something. I don't know. So of course Peter Parker has to leave, so as Spider-Man he fights and defeats Kraven the Hunter, and by that time the party's all broken up. So since it's Peter's apartment where they're having the party, he goes to his bedroom and he begins to change. And that's when Gwen Stacy walks in on him and sees him. And finally, they have a moment where they're together alone for the first time. Peter had gotten a Valentine from someone earlier in the comic and he didn't know who it was, so he assumed it was Aunt May because he's an idiot, I guess. And Gwen Stacy reveals it was her who sent him the Valentine and asks him, "Will you be my Valentine?" And at that point, they kiss, and Peter Parker in the present says, "That's when you had me, Gwen Stacy, all of me." Then you're treated to a couple more pages. You flash forward to the present time where it's Peter up in his attic telling the story of how he met Gwen Stacy. He says he misses her. He says that he's tried to make sense of her death. And if you're familiar with the comics, then you know that at some point after this, the Green Goblin abducts Gwen Stacy and he throws her off a bridge. Spider-Man catches her, but in the process, her neck snaps and she dies. So this comic ends with 3 pages in the present. Peter, talking to the recorder at the end, says, "I guess when I try and sum up how I feel sometimes around this time of year, I feel blue. Not like I've been dipped in with a tidy bowl man, but like in music and jazz and feeling blue. And I long for a time when a girl I knew with an incredible smile and so much good in her heart made me think life can be great." And the final panel you see is just a series of pictures of Gwen and Peter together, smiling and laughing. And that is the story of Spider-Man Blue. Now, what I find most interesting about this comic is the fact that even though this comic is supposed to be about Gwen and Peter's relationship, you don't actually see a lot of their relationship. The only part where the two of them are together is the penultimate scene where they kiss. And so that's what I mean when I say that Spider-Man Blue feels like an incomplete love story. It feels like you're missing a lot about their relationship. You don't see their first date together. You don't see Gwen Stacy's reaction to finding out that he's Spider-Man. You don't see what their early relationship was like. And so in that sense, it feels like there are a lot of things missing about their relationship. And so if this is a book that is intended to show off their relationship, it's lacking a lot. But as I said, this book still made me feel something. Peter's narration and the weight of his words carry the book a lot. Essentially, he misses Gwen Stacy and he's just trying to remember the best of her. But this is him remembering the story of how the two of them met. And so purely because of that, that's why it matters. He loved Gwen, and so he's just trying to remember the start of things. Even though this book doesn't show off all their serious dates, even though this book doesn't show off their serious moments as a couple, even though this book doesn't recall or retell Gwen Stacy's death, I think that it carries a lot of emotional weight because of what is left unsaid. Because it doesn't show off any of these things, it allows the reader to fill in the gaps to a certain extent. Of course, I think if you're familiar with the original run of comics that this is based off of, I think you'll probably have a different view of it than me. I haven't ever read the original Gwen Stacy comics. I haven't ever read about her death. And so because of that, for me, this book allows me to fill in the gaps. And so I think that is what makes it so effective as a love story for me. There are a lot of things about the book that feel corny or silly. It feels silly that even though Peter Parker is a nerd, he has these really hot girls obsessing over him. A lot of the dialogue feels silly because it's written in the same style as those comics from the 60s. And all in all, despite the fact that Peter Parker encounters a lot of trials and setbacks, it still feels like a pretty great life. There's definitely a sense of joy and optimism that pervades the pages related to the past. And of course, whenever you read the pages in the present, they are almost entirely blue. There's a quote at the very beginning of the second issue where Peter says, "People stay with you for as long as you can remember them. I don't want to forget you, Gwen Stacy. Stay with me." I did a video over the manga Goodbye Eri some time ago, and it's a video focused a lot on how we will be remembered after we die. As I said in that video, I think that whenever you're remembering someone gone, you can imagine them better or worse than they actually were. There's a line in a Fall Out Boy song that says, "I want to stay golden in your memory." And it kind of feels like that's how Gwen Stacy is being remembered in this comic. Peter is stuck remembering the beginning of their relationship because, as with any relationship, there are good times and there are bad times. But at the very beginning in the honeymoon phase, things seem to be perfect, the stars seem to align, and everything seems right in the world. And so I think that by leaving certain things unsaid, I think the book is able to make the reader feel a sense of remorse and loss over Gwen Stacy's death. Even though the character died a long time ago, and even though over the past several years we've had several different alternate versions of Gwen Stacy show up in Spider-Man comics and in movies, I think this book made me feel something largely due to the fact that I had to fill in so many blanks about their relationship. Because of the fact that it leaves so much unsaid, and because you're told things about their relationship by Peter and not shown them, you as a reader are forced to feel the same sense of loss that Peter feels. So I think this comic is imperfect. It feels like an imperfect and an incomplete love story, but I think it actually benefits from being that. Of course, I found the relationship stuff to be so much more engaging in this comic than the superhero battles, but at the end of the day, this comic made me feel something, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you for watching. If you have any comic book recommendations, leave them below, and thank you. Have a nice night. Bye. Look, all that I'm saying is that whenever I was in college and I got sick, I didn't have hot girls feeding me soup. I just drank a ton of NyQuil and slept a bunch, and I got really depressed and played a bunch of Dark Souls. There were no girls lining up at my door to read me Huck Finn. All that I'm saying is that Peter Parker doesn't appreciate what he got.